Chapter 1: The Hum. The hum began as a secret, a ghost in the audio, a faint carrier wave hiding beneath the noise of Kaya Yevinen's life. She first registered it months ago, a low-frequency oscillation in her left ear, persistent as a distant engine. In her seismology lab, surrounded by the gentle whir of servers and the scratching pens of spectrographs, it was almost undetectable. A quirk of the building's wiring, she presumed. An artifact of aging transformers somewhere in the university's labyrinthine basement. She logged it in her personal journal with the same dispassionate curiosity she applied to a peculiar seismic tremor. Persistent auditory artifact, approx. 50 Hz, left side only. Possible tinnitus. Monitor for changes. Change arrived not as a whisper but as a formal declaration printed on thick, cream-colored paper. The envelope from the genetics company bore a crisp, minimalist logo. Inside, the report unfolded like a map to a country she never intended to visit. Most of it was boilerplate, predictable percentages of Western European heritage, a smattering of Baltic markers. Mundane. She almost tossed it. Her finger, however, caught on a supplemental page, an addendum flagged with a small asterisk. Haplogroup U5B1B1, a Atramentari variant. The name was absurd, theatrical. It sounded less like a genetic marker and more like a constellation invented by a fantasy novelist. A footnote offered a clipped explanation. A rare subclade associated with isolated North Sea populations, historically linked to seafaring communities with poorly documented migratory patterns. The day she read those words, the hum shifted. It shed its guise as an industrial ghost and sharpened into something more defined, more personal. The frequency climbed, a subtle but definite change. It was no longer a flat tone but a complex signal, layered with a faint, rhythmic static. It sounded like a recording of a storm on a distant shore, played through a broken speaker. Her focus at work began to fray. She would be calibrating a sensor array, her mind deep in the mathematics of wave propagation when the hum would surge. It coiled in her ear, a tiny, insistent serpent of sound. She would press her palm hard against her skull, a futile attempt to crush the noise. Her colleagues noticed. They saw the slight tick in her jaw, the way her eyes would lose focus for a moment. "Everything all right, Kaya?" Dr. Evans asked one afternoon, his round face etched with concern. He peered over her shoulder at a seismogram displaying a perfectly flat line. No terrestrial activity. The world was quiet. "Fine," Kaya replied, her voice tighter than she intended. "Just a headache." The lie tasted thin. It wasn't a headache. A headache was a blunt instrument of pain. This was a needle. It was a signal searching for a receiver, and her temporal lobe, it seemed, was the intended antenna. Her scientific mind rebelled. The human brain was a master of apophenia, of finding patterns in noise. Her recent discovery of a peculiar ancestry, coupled with a developing case of tinnitus, was creating a feedback loop of psychosomatic symptoms. It was a logical, rational explanation. It was also completely unsatisfying. Her research started on a quiet Tuesday night, the city lights painting a dull orange glow on her apartment ceiling. The hum was a constant companion now, a low thrum against her pillow. She typed Atramentari into the search bar. The first results were sparse. A few obscure anthropological forums, a discredited 19th-century ethnographer who wrote of a tribe of soot-skinned sailors who navigated by some unknown sense. He called them the ink-marked and claimed they worshipped geological formations. The academic community dismissed his work as romantic fiction. Kaya scrolled deeper. She cross-referenced the haplogroup with geological survey databases, a strange hybrid search that no one had likely ever attempted. For hours, the digital search yielded nothing. The trail was cold, a footnote on a genetics report leading to a dead end. She was about to close the laptop, to concede defeat to her overactive imagination when a hit appeared. It was not from a scientific journal, but a digitized maritime archive. A single entry from a ship's log, dated 1887. The vessel was the Sea Serpent, a British survey ship charting remote patches of the North Atlantic. The entry was written by the ship's geologist. October 17. Our compasses have become useless. Within a 10-league radius of the unnamed island at 64 degrees N, 18 degrees W, they spin as if possessed. The locals on the nearest inhabited rock speak of it with a unique dread, calling it the magnetic maw or Surtur's anvil. They refuse to approach it. The island itself is a geological anomaly, a shield volcano, likely active, with beaches not of silica but of fine, black sand which glistens with a metallic sheen. The most peculiar report from the locals concerns the island's supposed effect on certain families. They claim some bloodlines hear a song from the maw, a call that drives them to its shores, never to return. Superstitious nonsense, of course. Yet, the magnetic interference is a phenomenon I must investigate. The sand itself seems to resonate. Kaya read the entry 3 times. 64 degrees N, 18 degrees W. She pulled up a satellite map, her fingers trembling slightly. A small, isolated dot in the vast gray expanse of the ocean. A smudge of dark landmass. An island, unnamed on modern charts, just a topographical designation. As her screen zoomed in, resolving the pixels into the dark cone of a volcano and the stark, black lines of its beaches, the hum in her ear surged with vicious intensity. It was no longer a hum, it was a roar. A wave of dizziness washed over her, so potent she had to grip the sides of her desk. The static crackled. Beneath it, for the first time, she heard something else. A pattern. A voice made of static and gravity, speaking a language she could not understand but whose meaning was terrifyingly clear. Come. Her scientific mind screamed in protest. Coincidence. Auditory hallucination. The power of suggestion acting on a stressed brain. But the data points were irrefutable. A rare genetic marker from a lost seafaring people. A specific, unmapped volcanic island with extreme magnetic properties. The hum in her head, a signal that grew stronger as she neared its source through digital means. Each point was a pin on a corkboard, and the red string connecting them all spelled out a terrifying, impossible conclusion. She spent the next week in a state of suspended disbelief. She tried to work, but the seismographs on her screen seemed to mock her. They measured the groans and shifts of the planet's solid, real forces. What machine could measure the pull she now experienced? It was a physical thing, a constant, low-grade tension in her gut, an insistent tug aimed northwest. The hum was its metronome. It dictated her sleep, invading her dreams. She saw beaches of shifting, black iron filings. She saw a mountain breathing plumes of gray smoke into a white sky. She saw herself walking toward the surf, not in fear, but with a sense of grim purpose, as if returning home after a long absence. The decision solidified on a Friday. She was standing in the lab holding a piece of lodestone, a natural magnet. As she turned it in her palm, its weak field interacting with the Earth's own, the hum in her ear modulated in perfect sync with her movements. She rotated the stone, and the pitch of the hum shifted. She held it still, and the hum steadied. It was a direct, repeatable experiment. The proof was in her hand. Her body, her very DNA, was reacting to magnetism in a way it should not. She walked into Dr. Evans' office, her face a pale, determined mask. "I need to take a leave of absence," she stated, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. "A personal matter." Evans looked up, surprised. "Kaya, is everything okay? You seem—" "I have some family research to conduct," she cut him off, the lie tasting more solid this time, fortified by purpose. "In Iceland, it's important." He saw the resolve in her eyes, the hard set of her jaw. He knew better than to argue. "Of course, take the time you need." That night she booked a one-way flight to Reykjavik. From there she would find a way to the outlying islands, and from there a way to the anomaly at 64 degrees N, 18 degrees W. She packed a duffel bag with Arctic gear, satellite phone, portable seismometer, rock hammers, and a high-sensitivity magnetometer. She was a scientist. She would approach this as a scientific problem. She would go to this island, she would take her readings, she would analyze the unique sand, and she would debunk this calling. She would find the geological or neurological source of the hum, and she would silence it. She would reassert the dominance of logic and reason over the superstitious whispers in her own blood. As she zipped the bag shut, the locket she always wore, a simple silver oval from her grandmother, swung forward. It felt unusually warm against her skin. She opened it. Inside was a faded picture of a woman she never met, her great-grandmother, her face severe and her eyes dark. On the other side, she noticed something she'd never seen before, a tiny, almost invisible crack in the silver backing. She pried at it with a fingernail. The backing came loose, revealing a hidden compartment. Nestled inside was not a note, not another picture, but a single, tiny, razor-thin sliver of black stone. It was no bigger than a grain of rice, dull and unremarkable. But as she stared at it, the hum in her ear screamed. It coalesced into a single, piercing, undeniable note. The note of a tuning fork struck on the anvil of a volcano. Her scientific mission was a lie. She admitted it to herself in the silent darkness of her apartment. She was not going to the island to debunk a myth. She was going because she had no other choice. The string attached to her was being pulled, and she had to see who or what was holding the other end. Chapter 2: The Maw. The air in the tiny Icelandic fishing village of Vik smelled of salt, diesel, and something ancient and cold that blew off the glaciers. Kaya spent 3 days there, a ghost in bright orange winter gear, moving between a Spartan guest house and the windswept docks. The locals were polite but distant, their conversations a musical language she couldn't penetrate. Her attempts to charter a boat to the coordinates she had memorized were met with slow shakes of the head, wary eyes and the same word, repeated like a warding spell. Surtur Streki, the dragon of Surtur. They pointed south, out into the churning gray sea, their faces grim. No one would go, not for money, not for reason. The place was poison, they said. It ate ships, it ate minds. On the fourth day, her frustration was a physical weight. The hum was relentless here, a constant pressure inside her skull. The island was close. She could feel it, a vast magnetic presence just over the horizon. She was nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee in the village's only cafe when a man sat opposite her without invitation. He was old, his face a road map of deep lines carved by sun and sea. A thick gray beard covered the lower half of his face, and his eyes were the pale, washed-out blue of a winter sky. "You seek the maw," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was a low rumble like stones grinding together. Kaya straightened, her guard up. "I'm a geologist. I'm looking for someone to take me to an area of unusual magnetic activity." The old man gave a short, humorless laugh. "You wear your science like a shield, girl, but a shield is no good when the attack comes from inside." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "My name is Finian Cove. My brother heard the same song you hear. He sailed to the Maw 30 years ago. He did not return." Kaya's breath hitched. The song. A buzz, a whisper, a promise. It sounds different to each person it calls, but the destination is always the same. Finian stared into her eyes, and for a moment she saw not an old fisherman, but a man who had spent 3 decades staring at a hole in the world where his brother used to be. "I will not take you, but I will tell you who might." He directed her to a rusted, formidable-looking vessel at the far end of the docks, away from the prettier fishing boats. The St. Yernusker, or Star Cutter. Its hull was streaked with rust, its paint peeling, but its lines were strong, built for breaking ice, not for pulling nets. Its captain was a man named Berkir, a giant with a scarred face and a palpable aura of greed. Berkir's price was astronomical. He listened to Kaya's request, his small, piggish eyes gleaming. He did not speak of curses or dragons. He spoke of magnetic interference that destroyed navigation systems, of unpredictable currents that could tear a hull apart. He spoke of risk, and risk had a high price. Kaya liquidated half her savings, the wire transfer a final, irreversible severing of her ties to her old life. They set off at dawn 2 days later. The sea was agitated, a slate-gray sheet chopped by a bitter wind. Berkir and his 2-man crew were grimly silent, communicating with curt hand gestures and monosyllabic grunts. As the familiar coastline of Iceland vanished behind them, the atmosphere on the St. Yernusker grew heavier. Kaya stood on the deck, gripping the cold metal rail, the salt spray like needles on her face. The hum in her ear began to change again. The roar subsided, replaced by a complex polyphonic signal. It was as if she were tuning a radio dial, catching snippets of 100 different stations at once. Her professional equipment began to fail first. The digital compass on her satellite phone spun uselessly, a frantic blur of numbers. The sensitive magnetometer she had brought was overwhelmed, its needle vibrating violently against its pin, emitting a high-pitched whine of protest before she shut it down. "Your toys are no good here," Berkir grunted, emerging from the wheelhouse. He held up a simple, liquid-filled brass compass. The needle drifted lazily, pointing not north but directly toward their destination. Old ways are best in old places. The first sighting of the island was a low, dark smudge against the horizon, barely distinguishable from a bank of storm clouds. But as they drew closer, it resolved itself, rising from the sea like the fang of some immense submerged beast. It was a perfect volcanic cone, its slopes black and forbidding, a wisp of pale steam venting from its peak. And the beaches. The satellite photos had not done them justice. They were a slash of absolute black against the gray water, a shoreline made of night. The sand didn't glitter. It seemed to drink the pale, Arctic light, leaving a void where there should have been reflection. "The magnetic maw," Berkyer said, his voice flat. He would take them no closer than a quarter-mile from the shore. From there, she would take the ship's inflatable Zodiac to the beach. He and his crew would wait for 72 hours, not a minute more. If she was not at the rendezvous point, they would leave. "If the weather turns, we leave sooner," he added, his gaze fixed on the steam rising from the volcano. "The dragon is awake today." The water in the lee of the island was unnaturally calm, the surface like black oil. As Kaya and one of Berkyer's crewmen, a young man with terrified eyes named Gudmund, lowered the Zodiac, the hum in Kaya's head achieved a pristine, terrifying clarity. It was a chord, deep and resonant, a sound that vibrated not in her ear but in the marrow of her bones. It was a feeling of arrival. The journey to the shore was short but surreal. The water was so dark it seemed bottomless. Kaya trailed her gloved fingers in it. It was cold enough to cause a deep, aching pain in seconds. As they neared the beach, Gudmund kept his head down, his knuckles white on the Zodiac's ropes, muttering prayers in Icelandic under his breath. Kaya, however, could not look away. The sand was composed of fine, uniform grains of pure black. It wasn't a beach. It was a dune of iron filings, a thought that was both geologically fascinating and deeply unnerving. The tide line was a strange thing. Instead of foam, the small waves lapping the shore seemed to fizz, a quiet hissing sound, as if the water were reacting with the metallic sand. A faint, sharp smell hung in the air, the scent of ozone and hot metal. The Zodiac crunched against the shore. The sound was wrong, not the soft grating of sand but a sharp, crystalline scratching. Kaya stepped out, her boots sinking slightly. She looked down. The grains were not rounded by the sea. They were sharp, angular, like microscopic shards of obsidian. She scooped up a handful, her glove protecting her. The particles were heavy, dense. She brought them close to her face. They shifted and flowed over her glove, aligning themselves in faint, concentric patterns. She felt a tingling sensation through the thick material, a faint magnetic pull. 3 days, Gudmund said, his voice trembling. He refused to step out of the boat. He pushed the Zodiac away from the shore with an oar, his movements frantic. He did not look at her. He looked at the volcano, his face a mask of primal fear. Kaya stood alone on the beach of black sand, her supplies in a neat, heavy pile at her feet. The St. was a small, gray shape on the water, already turning to leave the lee of the island. The Zodiac was a shrinking orange dot. The hum was gone. For the first time in months, there was silence in her head. A perfect, absolute silence that was somehow more menacing than the noise it replaced. The signal had found its destination. The call was over. Now she stood in the receiver. The air was still. The world seemed to hold its breath. A single large black bird, a raven or a crow, took flight from a rocky outcrop. It didn't flap its wings in a normal rhythm. It flew in a series of straight, geometric lines, making sharp, unnatural 90-degree turns in the air as if following a grid laid out by an unseen hand. It circled her once, its movements jerky and strange, then flew directly toward the smoking peak of the volcano. She was utterly alone. A wave of profound isolation washed over her, so cold and vast it threatened to swallow her whole. She had come here seeking answers, to put a name to the ghost in her blood. Standing on that impossible shoreline, under the gaze of a smoking mountain and a sky the color of lead, she had a sudden, chilling certainty. The only answer she would find here was a new and much more terrible question. She shouldered her pack. Its weight was a small, solid reality in a place that felt like a dream. She took her first step inland, the crystalline sand crunching under her boot like broken glass. Chapter 3: Black Sand, Red Iron. The silence was a presence. It pressed in on Kaya from all sides, a palpable weight against her eardrums. In the lab, she had worked in anechoic chambers, rooms designed to absorb all sound, but this was different. That was an artificial absence. This felt like a fundamental law of the landscape, a silence that had existed for millennia, and her presence was a crude violation of it. Her own breathing sounded loud, intrusive. The crunch of her boots on the black sand was a gunshot in a library. She established a base camp 100 yards from the shore, in the shadow of a jagged outcrop of basalt that offered minimal protection from the wind. The place felt primordial, untouched. There was no vegetation near the coast, only the endless expanse of black sand and a scattered graveyard of volcanic rocks, twisted into agonized shapes by heat and pressure. She worked with methodical precision, a ritual of science to hold the encroaching dread at bay. She erected a small, sturdy expedition tent. She laid out her rations, her water supply, her medical kit. Lastly, she set up her geological equipment. The portable seismometer was first. She drove its sensor spike deep into the ground, a difficult task as the ground was a loose composite of sand and volcanic scree. Once connected, the digital display flickered to life. The needle on the virtual drum quivered, but not from tectonic activity. It was a steady, rhythmic, low-frequency vibration, not a tremor but a pulse, a heartbeat. The island was thrumming with it, a constant vibration emanating from deep within the volcano. The frequency was exactly 50 Hz, the same as the hum. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She noted it in her logbook, her hand surprisingly steady. Geological source of auditory phenomenon confirmed. Island emits constant 50 Hz microtremor. Source appears to be magma chamber resonance. It was a clean, scientific explanation. A wave of relief washed over her, so potent it made her feel lightheaded. This was a place of extreme but natural phenomena. There were no ghosts in her blood. Her rare genes simply made her susceptible to this specific frequency. It was a bizarre, but ultimately physical, explanation. Her confidence restored, she turned her attention to the sand. She filled a sample bag, the tiny, sharp grains grating against the metal scoop. Under a portable field microscope, the sight was breathtaking and horrifying. They were perfect, miniature crystals, jet black and flecked with iridescent traces of other metals. Many were needle-sharp. Some were shaped like tiny, interlocking gears. They were not products of random erosion. They looked manufactured, designed. She shook her head, dismissing the thought. Nature produced incredible geometric forms. Snowflakes, quartz crystals. This was no different. As the pale afternoon sun began its slow descent, painting the perpetual gray clouds with strokes of weak orange and purple, she decided to explore. She left most of her gear at the camp, taking only a pack with water, a rock hammer, and her grandfather's old military compass. It was a beautiful object, heavy brass with a floating dial, sealed and reliable. She trusted it more than any digital device. She walked parallel to the shore, heading toward a large ridge that promised a better vantage point. The landscape was a study in monochrome: black sand, gray rocks, white sky. The only color was the deep, unsettling rust red that stained some of the basalt formations, streaks of iron oxide weeping from the stone. The air remained sharp with the smell of ozone. She found the first anomaly 20 minutes into her walk, a pattern in the sand. Not the faint, concentric circles she had seen before, but something vast and complex. A perfect, sprawling spiral 100 feet across etched into the beach. It was a logarithmic spiral, a Fibonacci sequence rendered in black sand. It was too precise, too perfect to be the result of wind or water. She walked its perimeter, her boots carefully avoiding the lines. The sand within the spiral's arms seemed darker, more densely packed. It looked like a deliberate creation, a piece of art, or a diagram. Her scientific explanation began to crumble again. What natural force could create such a thing? A unique vortex of wind, a tidal eddy with mathematical precision. The possibilities felt thin, stretched to their breaking point. She took photos, her hand unsteady. She documented it, her description growing less geological and more unnerved with each word. She continued on, her senses now on high alert. Every shadow seemed to coalesce, every gust of wind sounded like a whisper. She reached the base of the ridge. It was a steep climb, a scramble over loose rock and scree. As she ascended, she noticed more of the red stains. They weren't just on the rocks. The black sand at the base of the ridge was mixed with it, creating a disturbing, muddy purple color. She knelt and touched it. It came away on her glove as a thick, reddish-brown paste. It had the coppery scent of old blood. Iron deposits, she told herself. Rich veins of hematite being weathered from the rock. Halfway up the ridge, she found the source. Tucked into a shallow cave carved by wind and time was a heap of bones. They were animal bones mostly. The ribcages of seals, the skulls of seabirds, but they were all shattered, broken with a terrible violence. And they were not clean. They were coated in the same rust-red substance. She picked up a fragment of vertebrae. It was unnaturally heavy. She scraped it with her rock hammer. Beneath the red coating, the bone was black, petrified. It looked as if the very marrow had been replaced with iron ore. A cold dread, sharp and acidic, rose in her throat. This was not a natural process. This was a charnel house. Something on this island was not just killing animals. It was changing them, infusing them with the metal of the land itself. She backed away from the cave slowly, her gaze scanning the surrounding rocks. She was not alone here. That certainty was absolute now. Her hand went to the compass hanging from her neck. She lifted it. The needle, which had been pointing vaguely north, was now spinning, a frantic, useless blur. It was the same as the digital compass on the ship. The magnetic field here was too chaotic, too powerful. Then she saw it. Not another spiral, but a track. A single line carved into the sand leading away from the cave and further inland. It was not a footprint. It looked as if someone had dragged a heavy, serrated object through the sand. The line was about 6 inches wide, a deep furrow with jagged edges. It was fresh. Her mission to debunk, to explain, was forgotten. A primal instinct took over, a desperate need for the safety of her camp. She turned and began to scramble down the ridge, her feet dislodging stones that clattered into the silence below. She didn't look back. She ran. She fled across the black sand, her lungs burning in the cold air. The perfect, silent world was now filled with menace. The geometric patterns, the iron-filled bones, the strange track in the sand, they were not data points. They were warnings. She reached her camp, her heart a wild drum against her ribs. The tent stood as she had left it. Her gear was untouched. Everything was normal. But the normality itself was terrifying. It felt like a trap, a stage set for a play in which she was the only unwitting actor. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and a deep twilight was bleeding across the sky. The temperature was dropping fast. She ducked into her tent, her hands shaking so badly it took her 3 tries to zip the flap closed. She sat in the darkness, trying to control her breathing. The silence was back, pressing in on the thin nylon walls. The pulse of the island, however, was stronger. She could feel it through the soles of her boots, a steady, rhythmic thrumming. Thump, 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 the heartbeat of the mountain. She fumbled for her headlamp, its beam cutting a stark white cone in the darkness. Her gaze fell on her pack, on the small brass compass she had brought, a relic of a more certain world. She had forgotten to check it again after its frantic spinning on the ridge. She picked it up. She expected the needle to be still or perhaps quivering slightly. It was not. The needle was perfectly still, but it was not pointing north. It was not pointing in any cardinal direction. The sharp, luminous tip was pointing directly at her. No matter how she turned the compass, rotating it in her hands, the needle rotated with it, its point steadfastly aimed at her chest. It was not tracking the Earth's magnetic field. It was tracking the iron in her blood. And then, as she stared at it in horror, it began to move. It wasn't spinning. The needle lifted off its pin, straining upward, trying to break through the glass of the compass face. It was pointing toward her heart, pulled by a force that was both inside her and all around her. The brass casing grew hot in her hand, the heat intensifying until she cried out and dropped it. It fell to the floor of the tent, the needle still pointing at her, vibrating with a silent, furious energy. Chapter 4: The Keeper. Sleep was impossible. Kaya spent the night huddled in her sleeping bag, a rock hammer clutched in her hand, every nerve alight. The rhythmic pulse of the island was a form of torture, a constant reminder of the living, breathing thing beneath her. The compass lay on the tent floor, its needle still aimed at her like an accusing finger, the brass casing now cool to the touch. She did not sleep. She waited for the dawn, a thin, gray wash of light that did little to dispel the profound darkness of the place. Morning brought a renewed, if fragile, sense of resolve. She was a scientist. Fear was an emotional response to incomplete data. She needed more data. The track she had found, the strange spiral, the iron-saturated bones, They were all pieces of a puzzle. Leaving now meant abandoning the puzzle half solved, and her curiosity, a force almost as strong as her fear, would not allow it. She would be cautious. She would explore with a weapon in hand, and her satellite phone within easy reach, a fragile link to a world where things made sense. She decided to follow the track she had discovered. It was a foolish, reckless idea, and she knew it, but it was the only concrete lead she had. It was a thread, and she had to pull on it. She packed a day bag, her rock hammer clipped to her belt. She left the haunted compass in the tent. The track was easy to follow, a stark, deliberate scar across the black sand. It led her away from the coast, climbing steadily toward the volcano's lower slopes. The landscape grew more rugged, the sand giving way to fields of sharp, porous volcanic rock that tore at the soles of her boots. The silence deepened. Here, there was not even the sound of the distant surf. The air was thin and cold. After an hour of hiking, she entered a narrow canyon carved between two towering walls of basalt. The track led directly into it. The walls were sheer, almost perfectly smooth, and coated in a thin layer of black dust that puffed away with each footstep. The pulse of the island was stronger here, the vibrations traveling up through her legs. The canyon twisted and turned, a natural labyrinth. She felt a rising sense of claustrophobia, the strip of gray sky above seeming to shrink with every step. She rounded a sharp bend and stopped dead. A man stood in the center of the canyon, not 20 feet away. He was waiting for her. He was tall and unnaturally thin, a figure of sharp angles wrapped in dark, practical clothing. His face was gaunt, dominated by high cheekbones and a strong jawline all weathered to a pale tan. His hair was dark, cut short, but it was his eyes that held her. They were the color of a stormy sea, a flat, washed-out gray, and they watched her with an unnerving, placid intensity. He held a long, gnarled wooden staff, its top capped with a large, unpolished chunk of lodestone. He was the source of the track. The base of his staff was fitted with a serrated iron ring, a perfect match for the furrow in the sand. Kaya's hand went to the rock hammer at her belt. Her heart was a frantic bird in her chest. "You are trespassing," the man said. His voice was calm, a low, even tenor with a strange, unplaceable accent. It held no anger, no surprise. It was a simple statement of fact. "Who are you?" Kaya demanded, her own voice coming out sharper than she expected. "I am the keeper of this place," he replied, taking a slow step forward. He moved with a quiet, deliberate grace. "My name is Merk Vance, and you should not be here. This is unmapped territory. It doesn't belong to anyone," Kaya countered, standing her ground. Her scientific mind, her shield, was reasserting itself in the face of a tangible human threat. Merk offered a thin, mirthless smile. "You are mistaken. It does not belong to a person. It belongs to itself. I am merely its steward." His gaze dropped to the rock hammer at her belt, then back to her eyes. "You come with tools to break, to analyze. You see rock and sand. You do not see the truth." "And what is the truth?" Kaya asked, a challenge in her tone. "The truth is that this island is alive. It is aware, and it does not welcome visitors." He took another step. "It is a holy place, a place of becoming. Your presence here is a profanity." The word holy struck Kaya as profoundly wrong. This place was not holy. It was menacing. It was predatory. I am a geologist. I am here to study the unique magnetic properties of this volcano. The properties you seek are the thoughts of a sleeping god, Merck said, his voice dropping, taking on a resonant, preacher-like quality. The vibrations are its breath. The steam is its sigh. You are an insect crawling on the skin of a titan, and your scientific instruments are clumsy, insulting pins. His calm, fanatical certainty was more terrifying than any threat. He was not a madman in the conventional sense. He was utterly, serenely convinced of his reality. The Atramentari blood runs in you, Merck continued, his gray eyes seeming to pierce right through her. The island called, and you answered. This is as it should be, but you come with ignorance. You come with disbelief. This is a flaw that must be corrected. Kaya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. How do you know about my bloodline? The island told me, he said simply, as if explaining the weather. He gestured with his staff toward the canyon walls. It speaks. To those who know how to listen, it felt your approach, an air arriving with a divided heart, a dangerous thing. You're insane, Kaya whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. Merck's expression did not change. Is it insanity to believe the evidence of your senses? You have felt the pull. You have heard the hum. Your compass points to your own heart. Your science has failed you at every turn, yet you cling to it, a child's security blanket. He was right, and that was the most terrifying thing of all. He had articulated every fear, every doubt that had plagued her since she arrived. "What do you want?" Kaya asked, her hand tightening on the hammer. "I want you to leave," Merck said, his voice hardening for the first time, a sliver of steel beneath the calm. "You are not ready. Your skepticism is a poison here. It could disrupt the balance. It could spoil the great work." "What work?" He looked past her, his gaze focused on the volcano's peak. A ceremony, a communion, the awakening, the purpose for which this bloodline was created. His eyes returned to her, and they held a deep, ancient weariness. "Generations of my family have watched this place. We are the guardians, the rival line, the ones who ensure the vessel is pure when it arrives." His words hung in the silent air. Vessel. The word landed like a stone in her gut. "Go back to your boat," Merck commanded. "Go back to your world of neat, explainable things. Forget this place. If you are meant to return, the island will call you again when you are worthy. But if you stay now in your current state of disbelief, I cannot guarantee your safety." "Are you threatening me?" "No," Merck replied, his voice softening again into its eerie calm. "I am not. The island is threatening you. I am merely translating. It is already testing you, probing your fears. If you stay, it will begin to unmake you. It will take your doubts and your anxieties and give them form. And those forms will be very, very real." He turned his back on her then, a gesture of absolute dismissal. He began to walk away, his staff leaving its distinctive, serrated track in the black dust. "This is your only warning, Kaya Yevinen," he called over his shoulder, not bothering to look back. "The maw is hungry. Do not feed it your disbelief." He rounded another bend in the canyon and was gone. Kaya was left alone, her heart pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm. The pulse of the island seemed to answer it. Thump, 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 thump. She stared at the empty space where he had stood, then at the serrated line his staff had left in the ground. A warning, a line drawn in the sand, and she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that she was about to cross it. Her fear was a cold, hard knot, but beneath it something else was stirring. A spark of defiance, a refusal to be scared away from her own inheritance, no matter how monstrous. Chapter 5. Echoes in the Static. Kaya did not retreat. She stood in the canyon for a long time, the keeper's warning echoing in the oppressive silence. To leave now felt like a surrender, an admission that her world of reason and evidence was a fragile sham. Merck's words, intended to drive her away, had the opposite effect. They ignited a stubborn, angry spark of defiance. He had called her a vessel, a tool for some great work. The very idea was a violation. This was her blood, her calling. She would not be a passive participant in her own destiny. She made a decision. She would not go near the volcano or the keeper. She would stick to the coast. She would gather her samples, document what she could, and create a comprehensive geological and magnetic survey. She would build an irrefutable scientific case file of this place. She would arm herself with data, the only weapon she trusted. She would prove Merck Vance a deluded fanatic and this island a place of extreme but natural phenomena. She returned to her camp with a renewed, almost feverish sense of purpose. She spent the rest of the day working, moving with a manic energy. She took dozens of sand samples from different locations, labeling each with precise coordinates. She measured the magnetic field strength every 50 feet, creating a detailed contour map. The map was bizarre, a chaotic jumble of magnetic peaks and nulls with no discernible pattern. It was a cartography of madness. As dusk began to settle, a strange weather phenomenon rolled in from the sea. It was not a storm of wind or rain, but of static. The air grew thick, heavy with an electrical charge that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. A faint crackling sound filled the air, like 1,000 tiny sparks. Her satellite phone, which had been working intermittently, went completely dead. The screen was a mess of flickering, multicolored lines. The island was now completely cut off. She retreated to her tent, zipping it tight against the electrical haze. The pulse of the island seemed stronger, amplified by the atmospheric conditions. Inside the tent, the air crackled. Tiny blue sparks danced along the metal poles. She tried to review her notes, but the numbers and words swam before her eyes. Merck's warning slithered back into her mind. It will take your doubts and your anxieties and give them form. She shook her head, angry at her own vulnerability. It was a geomagnetic storm, a known phenomenon. It was interacting with the island's unique field. There was a rational explanation for everything. That is when she heard the sound. It was not the pulse of the island. It was a voice. A man's voice, muffled, crying out in pain and terror. It came from outside, from the direction of the beach. "No, please God, no. Get it off me." Kaya froze, her blood turning to ice. It couldn't be. Berkir and his crew were gone. Merck was inland. There was no one else on the island. Her hand strayed to the zipper of the tent. This had to be an auditory hallucination. The storm was affecting her brain just as Merck predicted. The scream came again, louder this time, choked with a wet, gurgling sound. It was a sound of final, absolute horror. It was too real. It was too close. Against her better judgment, against every instinct screaming at her to stay inside, Kaya slowly unzipped the tent flap. She peered out into the strange, electric twilight. The air was thick with a shimmering haze. The black beach was awash in the eerie glow of the static storm. And there, halfway to the water's edge, was a figure. It was a man. He was on his knees, his back to her. He was dressed in the clothes of a sailor from a bygone era, a rough woolen tunic and heavy trousers. He was clawing at his own chest, his body convulsing. As Kaya watched, paralyzed with a mixture of terror and disbelief, the man's form began to flicker like a bad holographic projection. His edges blurred, dissolving into pixels of static before snapping back into focus. He was not entirely there. He let out one final, ragged scream and fell forward onto the sand. He lay still. Kaya's scientific mind scrambled for an explanation. A magnetic phantom, an atmospheric projection, a complex hallucination induced by the storm. She stayed by her tent for what felt like an eternity, watching the unmoving shape on the beach. It did not fade. It remained, a dark lump on the black sand. Driven by a compulsion she didn't understand, a need to know, to confirm, she grabbed her most powerful flashlight and stepped out of the tent. The air zapped her skin. Each step toward the figure was a monumental effort of will. The sand seemed to pull at her boots, trying to hold her back. As she drew closer, she saw the scene was even more gruesome than she had imagined. The man lay face down. The sand around him was disturbed, torn up by his struggles. But it was the thing on his back that made her stomach heave. It was a creature, a monstrosity. It looked like a giant obsidian crab, its shell glistening like wet glass. Its multiple, spindly legs were dug deep into the man's back, and its head was buried in his neck. This was no hallucination. This was real, a predator, an unknown species, a logical, biological explanation. She felt a strange, detached sense of relief. A monster was something she could almost understand. She took another step closer, the beam of her flashlight fixed on the creature. And then the illusion shattered. The creature wasn't a separate entity. Its legs were not legs. They were tendrils, tendrils made of glistening black magnetic sand. They flowed from the main body, which was a roiling, chaotic mass of the same substance, fused into a solid, crab-like shape. It was a part of the beach, animated, given predatory form. As she watched, the creature stirred. It extracted itself from the sailor's neck with a sickening, wet pull. It turned. It had no face, no eyes. Its front was a swirling vortex of sand, a miniature cyclone of black, crystalline shards, and in its center something glowed. A faint, red light pulsing in time with the island's heartbeat. The sailor at its feet flickered again, more violently this time. His body dissolved into a cloud of static and vanished completely, leaving only an impression in the sand. He was an echo, a recording. The creature, however, remained. It was not an echo, it was the recording device, and it was hungry. It turned its faceless head toward her. The faint red light intensified. The vortex of sand spun faster. A low, grinding sound filled the air, the sound of a million tiny, sharp grains rubbing together. Kaya was frozen. Her mind could not process what she was seeing. This was not biology. This was not geology. This was something else, something impossible. And then it moved. It did not scuttle like a crab. It flowed. The sand, stitched as if pulled by an invisible string, glided across the beach toward her, its form constantly shifting, the tendrils of sand coalescing and separating. It was a living nightmare, born of the island's very substance. The sight broke her paralysis. She screamed, a raw, ragged sound of pure terror. She turned and ran, her legs pumping, her boots slipping on the sharp sand. She did not run for the tent. The tent was a flimsy nylon trap. She ran for the only other sanctuary she could think of. She ran for the hard, solid reality of the rocks. She scrambled up the basalt outcrop near her camp, her fingers raw, her lungs on fire. She reached the top of the rocks and dared a look back. The creature had stopped at the edge of the rocky ground, its form poolsing. It seemed unable or unwilling to leave the sand. It stood there, a sentinel of horror, its red light fixed on her, a promise of violence. The static storm raged. The island thrummed its relentless alien heartbeat. Kaya huddled on the cold, hard rock, shivering, her scientific worldview shattered into a million pieces. Merk Vance had been right. The island had taken a form. It had shown her its teeth. And she knew, with a certainty that was now carved into her soul, that this was only the beginning. The island was awake, and it knew her name. Chapter 6: The Architect of Bone. Dawn arrived not as a reprieve, but as a slow, merciless reveal. The static storm had subsided, leaving the air tasting clean and cold, stripped of its electric charge. The sky was a high, clear gray. From her perch on the basalt outcrop, Kaya watched the beach. The sand-stitched was gone, vanished. There was no sign it had ever existed, save for the deep, unsettling impression in the sand where the spectral sailor had fallen. The tide had not washed it away. The mark was too far from the water line. It had simply been erased. She remained on the rocks for another hour, every muscle screaming in protest, a cold, rigid fear locking her joints. Thirst eventually drove her down. Her water was in the tent. Her supplies were in the tent. Her entire fragile bubble of civilization was sitting just a few yards away, a beacon of vulnerability on the black sand. She descended from the outcrop, her rock hammer held in a white-knuckled grip, her movements slow and deliberate. The camp was untouched. The tent flap fluttered in the breeze. The silence had returned, profound and unnerving. She checked her equipment with a frantic energy. The satellite phone was still dead, its screen a blank black mirror. She was completely, utterly alone. Alone with the memory of what she had seen. Alone with Merk. Her anger at the keeper had evaporated, replaced by a cold, grudging respect. He had warned her. He had understood the nature of this place in a way her science could not. It will take your doubts and your anxieties and give them form. The phantom sailor, the sand creature, had they been conjured from her own mind? Was the island an amplifier for her subconscious fears of being stranded, of being attacked by an unknown predator? The thought was terrifying, a violation on a psychological level. Or was Merk wrong? Were the creatures real, independent entities, and his explanation merely a philosophical gloss on a deadly truth? Which was worse? A world with real monsters, or a world where your own mind could create them to kill you? She knew she could not stay at the camp. It was too exposed, too close to the sand, the domain of the stitched. The inland, the territory of Merck, seemed equally perilous. Her options were dwindling, the island a closing fist. There was only one direction left. She scanned the coastline, her eyes tracing the jagged line where black sand met black rock. To the north, the coast was a gentle, sloping beach, an open expanse. To the south, it became a maze of sea stacks and sheer cliffs, a chaotic, broken landscape, a place to hide. She made the choice in an instant. She would move her camp. She would find a defensible position amongst the cliffs, a cave or a high ledge accessible only by climbing, a place where the sand could not reach her. It took her 2 exhausting trips to haul her gear. The pack felt heavier than before, each item a useless token from a world that no longer seemed to exist. She found a suitable location a mile down the coast, a wide, shallow sea cave set 20 feet up a sheer rock face. It was a difficult climb, requiring her to find handholds and footholds in the crumbling basalt, but its inaccessibility was its chief virtue. From its mouth, she had a clear view of the beach below and the sea beyond. The floor of the cave was bare rock, free of the malevolent sand. It was a fortress. She spent the day fortifying her new home. She hauled her gear up with a rope, her muscles burning. She set up the tent inside the cave, an absurd layer of protection, but one that provided a crucial psychological barrier against the oppressive emptiness of the place. As she worked, she felt a change in the island's pulse. It was still there, the constant 50 Hz thrum, but it was fainter here, dampened by the sheer mass of rock around her. It was a small mercy, but one she clung to desperately. Late in the afternoon, driven by a need to understand the enemy, she decided to explore her new surroundings. The cliffs were a labyrinth of eroded basalt. She moved cautiously, testing each handhold, keenly aware that a single slip could mean a broken leg, a death sentence in this place. She found more of the shattered, iron-infused bones she had seen before. They were everywhere, tucked into crevices, piled at the base of cliffs. The southern coast was a boneyard. She followed a narrow ledge around a massive buttress of rock and found herself on a hidden beach. It was a small, secluded cove, walled in on 3 sides by towering cliffs. The sand here was different. It was still black, but it was littered with thousands of objects that glinted in the pale light. At first, she thought they were shells, but as she drew closer, she realized they were bones. Not the shattered, petrified fragments she had been seeing. These were whole, skeletons. Dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, lay half buried in the black sand. There were seals, seabirds, what looked like a small whale, and things she could not identify, creatures with too many limbs, with jaws that bent at impossible angles. And there were human skeletons. Men and women, their bones arranged in postures of supplication or agony. They were all arranged in a pattern, spirals, the same logarithmic spiral she had seen drawn in the sand, but this one was rendered in 3 dimensions, a sprawling sculpture of death. At the very center of the cove, on a low, flat-topped rock, was a final, terrible construction. It was a throne made of human bones. Femurs formed the legs, spinal columns the back, a pelvic girdle the seat. Skulls, their empty sockets staring out at the sea, adorned the armrests. It was a work of meticulous, insane artistry. It was baroque, monstrous, and yet it had a terrifying symmetry. It was a piece of architecture. Standing before the throne, his back to her, was Merk Vance. He was not looking at her, he was working. In his hands he held a human rib bone, its end sharpened to a point. He was carefully etching a symbol onto a section of the throne's back, a complex interlocking knot. He was a craftsman tending to his masterpiece. Kaya ducked behind a rock, her breath catching in her throat. The man was not just a keeper or a steward. He was an artist, and his medium was death. He seemed to sense her presence. He stopped his work and stood motionless for a long moment, his head cocked as if listening to something she could not hear. Without turning, he spoke, his calm voice carrying clearly across the cove. "I see you have found my gallery." Kaya remained silent, pressed against the cold rock, her heart hammering. "Do not be afraid," Merk said, finally turning. His face was placid, his gray eyes unreadable. "This is not violence. This is worship. This is an offering." "An offering to what?" Kaya whispered, the words barely audible. "To the resonator, the intelligence in the stone," he said, gesturing to the volcano, a faint plume of steam rising from its peak. "It is a geological consciousness. It thinks in patterns, in mathematics, in resonance. The spiral is its most common signature, its divine geometry." He took a step toward her, his movements slow and non-threatening. "For centuries, things have washed ashore here. Animals, sailors, ships. The island claims them. It infuses them with its own substance, the iron in its blood. It makes them a part of itself. But the process is chaotic, raw. I provide the order. I take the raw materials the island provides and I arrange them into a pattern it can understand. A prayer spoken in bone." He looked at his creation with a glimmer of pride in his flat eyes. "It is my life's work, to welcome the heirs of the Atramentara and to maintain the sacred space." "You're a grave robber," Kaya spat, her revulsion overcoming her fear. "A monster." Merk's expression soured, a flicker of irritation crossing his features. "You still see with profane eyes. These are not graves. A grave is an end. This is a beginning. These are the foundation stones of the temple, the first notes of the symphony." He shook his head, a gesture of profound disappointment. "You are not ready. Your mind is a clutter of sentiment and misplaced morality. The island cannot speak through such a noisy vessel." He turned back to his throne of bones. "I told you to leave. That was a warning. The echoes you saw last night were a test. You failed. You reacted with fear, not understanding. The island now knows your weaknesses. It knows the shape of your anxieties. It will continue to test you, and each test will be more severe, more personal." He picked up another bone, a human fibula, and began to carefully wire it to the throne's armrest, his attention fully absorbed by his gruesome task. He had dismissed her again. She was an irrelevance, an annoyance in his sacred workshop. Kaya backed away slowly, her mind reeling. The man was not just a fanatic. He was an architect of horror, a high priest in a religion of geometry and death. He was not her enemy in a conventional sense. He was something far more terrifying, a gatekeeper who believed with every fiber of his being that he was preparing the way for a god, and that she was nothing more than the sacrificial lamb, or the key. She retreated from the cove of bones, her temporary fortress in the cave now feeling like a trap. There was no safety here. The island was a predator, the sand its teeth, and its keeper a madman who arranged the leftover bones into works of art. She was caught between them, a pawn in a game whose rules were written in a language of vibration and death. And she had the sickening feeling that the game was only just beginning. Chapter 7. A Voice in the Static. The psychological siege began that night. Kaya huddled in her cave, the small tent offering a pathetic illusion of security. The island's pulse was a constant companion, a deep bass note that vibrated through the stone floor. But now there was a new sound. It started faintly, a whisper on the edge of hearing, woven into the sound of the wind whistling past the cave mouth. It was her mother's voice. "Kaya, honey, what are you doing there? It's so cold." Kaya's entire body went rigid. Her mother was dead, ovarian cancer 7 years ago. She had held her hand in a sterile, white hospital room as she slipped away. The memory was a scar, sharp and permanent. "You're going to get sick, sweetheart. Come home. I've made your favorite soup." The voice was perfect. It was not a memory. It was here now, floating in the darkness of the cave. It had her mother's warmth, her gentle, chiding tone, the exact cadence of her speech. Kaya squeezed her eyes shut, digging her nails into her palms. "It knows the shape of your anxieties," Merck had warned. This was it. The island was rifling through her memories, pulling out her deepest grief and turning it into a weapon. "It's not real," she whispered into the darkness, her voice a ragged tremor. "You're not real." The voice laughed, a gentle, familiar sound that twisted like a knife in her gut. "Of course I'm real, silly. How can you say that? I'm right here. Can't you see me?" She refused to open her eyes. She knew what she would see: an illusion, a phantom woven from magnetism and her own sorrow, a tool designed to break her. She began reciting prime numbers, a desperate mantra of logic against the rising tide of emotional warfare. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. "Don't do that, Kaya. Don't shut me out again. You always do that. You always hide in your numbers. I waited for you to visit. You were always so busy with your work." The voice was no longer warm. It was laced with a chilling, guilt-ridden disappointment. "You're not real," Kaya repeated, her voice louder, angrier. "You are a magnetic phenomenon acting on my auditory cortex." "Is that what you told yourself when you missed my last birthday?" The voice prodded, its tone turning sharp, accusatory. "Was that just a phenomenon?" A sob caught in Kaya's throat. She clamped her hand over her mouth, refusing to give the illusion the satisfaction of her pain. She rocked back and forth, the prime numbers a frantic, meaningless litany. The voice continued for what felt like hours, a bespoke torture session tailored to her specific regrets. It spoke of family holidays she had missed for conferences, of phone calls she had cut short. It took every small, selfish act of her past and polished it into a gleaming weapon of guilt. Eventually, through sheer emotional exhaustion, she fell into a fitful, dream-haunted sleep. She woke to gray daylight, her body aching, her throat raw. The voice was gone. The only sound was the wind, but the emotional hangover was immense. The island had found a crack in her armor, and it had hammered a wedge deep into it. The day was a blur of paranoid activity. She reinforced her camp, creating tripwires from spare rope and a crude alarm system from empty ration tins. It was a futile gesture against a foe that could manifest from the air, but the act of doing something, anything, kept her from spiraling into despair. She tried the satellite phone again. Still dead. The screen showed only a waterfall of corrupted pixels, but as she was about to turn it off, something changed. For a single, fleeting second, the static resolved itself. An image appeared on the screen. It was a face. A man's face, gaunt and terrified, his mouth open in a silent scream. It was the face of the geologist from the 1887 ship's log she had read about. Before she could react, the image dissolved back into a cascade of static. Her blood ran cold. The island wasn't just projecting illusions. It was accessing information. It had plucked an image from a digital archive a world away and broadcast it to her phone. Or had it plucked the man's final, terrified moments from the sand itself, where they had been recorded like data on a hard drive? The realization was a paradigm shift. She was not just dealing with an intelligence. She was dealing with an archivist. The island was a library of pain, and its magnetic field was the retrieval system. She spent the afternoon trying to replicate the event. She held the dead phone, pointing it at different rock formations, at the sand, at the sea, like a diviner searching for water. Nothing. The screen remained a chaotic mess. Frustrated, she tossed it onto her sleeping bag. As it landed, it flickered again. This time, it was not an image, but text. A single line, clear as day against the digital noise. "It hears you through the metal." The message vanished. Kaya stared at the blank screen, her mind racing. The metal, the phone's components, the locket she wore, the iron in her blood. The island was a receiver and metal was its antenna. It was how it heard, how it felt, how it communicated. This new piece of information was terrifying, but it was also a key. If she could understand the rules of communication, perhaps she could control it, or at least defend against it. She looked at her equipment, her rock hammers, her metal sample containers, her tent poles. She was surrounded by antennas, broadcasting her presence, her thoughts, her fears. She began a frantic process of purging. She took every piece of non-essential metal she had, spare pitons, extra carabiners, even her fork and spoon, and hurled them from the cave mouth into the sea below. She kept only her ice axe and rock hammer, her essential tools for survival. It was a desperate, perhaps superstitious act, but it felt necessary. As dusk fell, she waited for the inevitable psychic assault. She sat in her tent, now held up by ropes instead of its metal poles, and steeled herself for her mother's voice. But it did not come. The night was quiet, save for the wind and the island's pulse. Her purge had worked. She had, in some small way, blinded the island to her presence. A flicker of triumph, the first positive emotion she had experienced in days, warmed her. She had found a weakness. She had fought back and she had won a small victory. Her victory was short-lived. Around midnight, a new sound began, not a voice. It was a soft, rhythmic scratching sound. It was coming from outside the cave. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It was the sound of metal on stone. Kaya's heart plummeted. She grabbed her flashlight, her hand trembling. The sound was coming from the cliff face below her cave. She crawled to the mouth of the cave and peered over the edge, the flashlight beam cutting a sharp cone through the darkness. The light landed on a figure. It was halfway up the cliff, climbing toward her with a slow, inexorable purpose. It was not Merc. It was a sand-stitched, but it was different from the one she had seen on the beach. This one was female, its form vaguely recognizable from the tattered remains of a 20th century dress that clung to its sand-and-gore body. Its limbs were not tendrils but rigid bars of rusted metal scavenged from some long-lost shipwreck. Its hands were gnarled claws of fused metal and bone. It was using these claws to climb, digging into the basalt, the source of the scraping sound. In the center of its swirling sand torso, a red light pulsed, a malevolent heart. The island had learned. She had thrown away her metal, so it had built a new monster from the wreckage of the past, from the iron bones of its victims. It was climbing the cliff. It was coming for her, and it was bringing the metal with it. Chapter 8, written in rust. Panic seized Kaya, a cold, constricting serpent around her chest. The thing on the cliff was a nightmare-given form, a bespoke horror crafted from her own actions. It was an answer to her defiance. The scraping sound was the slow, rhythmic punctuation of her impending death. She scrambled back from the cave's edge, her mind a frantic storm of useless options. There was nowhere to run. She was cornered, 20 feet up a cliff face, her only exit blocked by a creature of sand and rust. Her scientific mind, her last bastion of sanity, struggled to assert itself over the primal terror. Analyze, observe, survive. She risked another look. The stitched was moving with a horrifying, unnatural slowness. It did not seem to be in a hurry. It climbed with a steady, mechanical rhythm, its metal claws gouging deep furrows in the rock. It was not just climbing, it was scarring the cliff face, leaving a deliberate trail. The red light in its chest pulsed, a baleful metronome. Her flashlight beam played over the creature's form. It was a grotesque amalgam. A human spine, black and petrified, was visible through a gap in the swirling sand of its torso. One of its arms was a corroded propeller shaft from a small boat. The claws were made of bent, rusted anchor flukes. The island was not just a predator. It was a scavenger, a necromantic engineer. A thought, cold and sharp as an ice pick, pierced through her fear. The stitched was made of metal, and she knew from her brief success the previous night that metal was a weakness as much as a weapon. It was an antenna, but could it be overloaded? Her eyes darted around the cave, landing on her pile of equipment. The satellite phone was useless as a communication device, but it was still a complex piece of electronics with a powerful lithium-ion battery. The portable seismometer had its own power source. Could she create a feedback loop, an electromagnetic pulse? A desperate, insane plan began to form, a gambit born of pure terror and a sliver of scientific intuition. The scraping was closer now. The creature was only 10 feet below the mouth of the cave. She could hear a new sound, a low, wet, grinding noise coming from its core, the sound of sand and bone and rust churning together. She worked with the frantic speed of the condemned. She ripped the casing off the satellite phone, exposing its circuit board. She did the same with the seismometer, its delicate sensors spilling onto the rock floor. She took the last of her gear wire and began connecting the two devices, positive to negative, bypassing fuses and safety regulators. She was creating a massive, uncontrolled short circuit. It would destroy both pieces of equipment. It might do nothing at all. Or it might create a powerful enough electromagnetic burst to disrupt the creature's cohesion. The scraping stopped. Kaya froze. The silence was more terrifying than the noise. She crawled to the edge of the cave and looked down. The stitch was directly below the entrance, its faceless head tilted upward. The red light in its chest flared, bright and intense. It had stopped climbing. It raised one of its anchor fluke hands and began to carve something into the rock face just below her sanctuary. She watched in horror as the sharp metal claw etched lines into the basalt. It was writing. The symbols were strange, a mix of ancient runes and complex geometric patterns. It was a message, a sentence. As the creature finished the last symbol, the red light in its chest pulsed violently, and a voice flooded Kaya's mind. It was not her mother's. It was a chorus of voices, 100 whispers speaking in unison, a sound of dry leaves skittering across pavement. The vessel is impure. The vessel resists. The vessel must be scoured. The message was not a threat. It was a diagnosis, and the stitched was the prescribed treatment. The creature lowered its arm and resumed its climb, its metal fingers finding purchase on the lip of the cave floor. A gnarled, rusty claw appeared over the edge. Kaya scrambled back, dragging her jury-rigged device with her. This was it, one chance. She held the two ends of the final wire, her heart hammering against her ribs. The creature heaved itself into the cave. It was larger than it had looked from below, a hulking figure that had to stoop to fit inside. The air grew thick with the smell of ozone and damp, metallic decay. The red light pulsed, casting a hellish glow over the scene. It took a step toward her, its metal feet grinding on the stone floor. Kaya screamed, a wordless cry of defiance, and jammed the wires together. The result was instantaneous and violent. The batteries discharged with a blinding blue-white flash and a deafening crack. The air ionized, tasting of lightning. Every hair on Kaya's body stood on end, and a jolt of electricity shot up her arm, forcing her to drop the wires. The creature convulsed. The red light in its chest exploded into a starburst of crimson energy. The unified chorus of whispers in Kaya's head shattered into 1,000 individual shrieks of pain and static. The stitched threw its head back in a silent, agonizing scream. The magnetic force holding it together failed. For a split second it was beautiful. The swirling sand lost its cohesion, expanding into a glittering cloud of black dust. The metal and bone components, stripped of their animating force, hung suspended in the air like a macabre art installation. Then gravity reasserted itself. The propeller shaft, the anchor flukes, the petrified spine, the rusted scrap, it all clattered to the floor of the cave in a graceless, mundane heap. The black sand rained down, covering the pile of junk in a fine, inert powder. Kaya lay on the floor, gasping, her arm numb, the smell of burnt electronics filling her nostrils. She had done it. She had won. She had faced the island's monster and destroyed it. Shaking, she got to her feet and approached the pile of debris. It was just that now junk. Dead metal and old bones covered in ordinary black sand. She nudged a piece of rusted metal with her boot. It was inert, lifeless. Her gaze fell upon the cliff wall where the creature had carved its message. The symbols were still there, a fresh scar in the ancient rock. The vessel must be scoured. The island believed she was sick, a flawed component. Her defiance, her skepticism, her very will to survive, it perceived these as impurities, and it had tried to wipe them clean. She looked from the dead pile of scrap to the message on the wall. A terrifying thought began to bloom in her mind. She had not destroyed a monster, she had destroyed a surgeon. The island wasn't trying to kill her, it was trying to fix her. It was trying to break her will, to empty her of herself, so that she could be filled with whatever it was that lay sleeping in the heart of the volcano. The goal was not her death. The goal was her submission. And she understood with a dawning, soul-crushing horror that there were fates far, far worse than death. Chapter 9. The Lodestone Heart. The victory was hollow. It left Kaya with a deeper, more existential dread than the fear of any physical monster. The island's intent was not to murder but to convert. It saw her as a broken tool that needed repairing, and its methods were brutal, invasive, and utterly alien. She was a specimen in a laboratory, and the experiments were escalating. She spent the next day in a state of hypervigilance, patching up her depleted defenses. Her electronic weaponry was gone, a pile of fused circuits and melted plastic. Her only advantage, the knowledge of the island's metallic sensitivity, was now a double-edged sword. She had to avoid metal, but she also needed it. Her ice axe and rock hammer were her only means of traversing the treacherous cliffs, her only real defense against a conventional threat. A threat like Merc. The keeper had been absent for 2 days, a silence that felt more menacing than his presence. Was he watching her from some hidden alcove? Was he aware of her battle with the Stitched? Or was he simply in his gallery of bones, patiently waiting for the island to finish its scouring? Supplies were dwindling. She had 4 days of water left, maybe 5 if she rationed strictly. Her food was similarly low. Time was no longer an abstract concept. It was a dwindling resource ticking away with the relentless pulse of the volcano. She had to act. Hiding in her cave was a slow death sentence. Leaving the island was impossible without a working phone. That left 2 terrible choices: confront Merc or head towards the volcano. One was a fanatic, the other the source of all this horror. She chose the fanatic. Merc had answers. He understood the rules of this place. She needed those rules if she was to have any hope of survival, let alone escape. She would approach him not as a victim, but as a negotiator. She had something he wanted, the Atramentari bloodline. She was the vessel he was waiting for. That gave her leverage. At least, she hoped it did. She set out at midday, leaving a small cache of supplies in the cave. She followed the coastline south, back towards the Cove of Bones. The air was still, the sky a uniform sheet of gray. The silence of the island felt different now. It wasn't empty. It felt expectant. It was waiting for her next move. She found the Bone Cove as she had left it, a silent monument to death. The throne of femurs and skulls dominated the small beach, but Merc was not there. A cold knot of disappointment and fear tightened in her stomach. Her plan had hinged on finding him here. But there were signs of his recent activity. A new set of bones, the delicate, fused skeleton of a dolphin, had been added to the base of the throne, and on the seat there was an object, something that had not been there before. Kaya approached cautiously, her ice axe held ready. The object was a book. It was an old, leather-bound journal, its cover warped by time and salt air. It was held open by a piece of human jawbone. It was Merck's diary, or perhaps the diary of a predecessor, a keeper's log. She picked it up. The leather was cold and stiff. The pages were thick, brittle, and covered in a tight, spidery script. The ink was a faded, brownish color, the color of dried blood. Entry 14,288. The vessel has arrived. As the scriptures predicted, an heir of the U5B1B1, a line, a female, has answered the call. She is strong, but her mind is clouded by the profane logics of the outer world. She denies the spirit of the stone. She sees geology, not divinity. Kaya's breath caught. He had been documenting her from the moment she arrived. Entry 14,289. The resonator begins the scouring. Its first test, the echo of the lost sailor, was met with fear. The second, the scavenger stitched, was met with violence. The vessel resists its own purification. It fights its healing. This is troubling. The scriptures speak of a willing vessel, one who embraces the transformation. The clinical, detached tone was chilling. He wrote of her torment as if describing a chemical reaction. She flipped through the pages. There were anatomical drawings of the island's mutated fauna. Complex diagrams of magnetic fields labeled the resonator's voice. Star charts marking celestial alignments. It was the work of a man, or a lineage of men, utterly consumed by a singular, monstrous faith. She found a section detailing the ritual, the communion. It spoke of a chamber deep within the volcano, the heart chamber, where a massive, pure lodestone was suspended in the magma. This was the core of the resonator's consciousness, its central processing unit. The ritual required the vessel to enter the chamber during a specific geomagnetic alignment. The vessel would place their hand upon the lodestone heart. Their blood, carrying the atramentare marker, would act as a catalyst, a key. It would complete a circuit that had been dormant for millennia. The book described the transformation in rapturous, terrifying detail. The vessel's consciousness would be unspooled, woven into the resonator's own. Their body would become an avatar, a physical extension of the island's will. They would gain control over the sand, the rock, the magnetic fields. They would shed their impure flesh and become a being of pure resonance and purpose. They would not die. They would become the god. Kaya slammed the book shut, her hands shaking. This was the great work, not just a sacrifice, but a complete obliteration of self, a forced apotheosis. A noise from the entrance to the cove made her spin around, her ice axe raised. Merck Vance stood there, his face unreadable, his gray eyes fixed on the book in her hands. "It is not polite to read another's private thoughts," he said, his voice as calm as ever. "Your thoughts are about me," Kaya shot back, her fear replaced by a surge of white-hot anger. "You're planning to dissect my mind and turn me into a puppet for your rock god." Merck tilted his head, a gesture of mild curiosity. "The vessel cannot be forced. The communion must be entered into willingly. That is the great paradox. That is why the scouring is necessary. The island must break your profane ego so your divine will can emerge. My will is to get off this island and away from you. Your will is a fiction, written by a society that fears the sublime, Merck said, taking a slow step forward. Your true will is in your blood. It is the will of the Atramentari, the will to join, to become. You have simply forgotten your own purpose. And you're here to remind me, she sneered. I am here to guide you, he corrected. But I see now the scouring has been insufficient. The island is powerful, but its methods are primal. It lacks subtlety. Perhaps a more direct approach is needed. He took another step, and for the first time, Kaya saw something other than placid faith in his eyes. There was a glimmer of impatience, of frustration, the look of a priest whose Messiah was refusing to play her part. The celestial alignment is in 2 days, Merck stated. The communion must happen then. The cycle cannot be broken. Stay away from me, Kaya warned, brandishing the ice axe. Merck ignored it. He kept walking toward her, his movements fluid and certain. You see this as a violation. I see it as an honor. You have been chosen to shed the prison of your singular consciousness, to merge with a mind that is as old as the world. You will not be destroyed, Kaya. You will be completed. He was 10 feet away, 5. He reached out a hand not to attack but as if to comfort a frightened animal. Give me the book. It is time for your final lesson. Kaya did not wait. She swung the ice axe not at him, but at the throne of bones. The sharp pick of the axe slammed into the seat, shattering a pelvic bone and sending shards of yellowed ivory skittering across the sand. Merck froze, his calm shattered. A look of pure, incandescent rage contorted his features. It was the look of a fanatic whose holy relic had been desecrated. You should not have done that, he hissed, his voice a low, dangerous snarl. He raised his gnarled staff, the lodestone at its tip seeming to thrum with a dark energy. The vessel is impure. It must be broken. The time for negotiation was over. Chapter 10. Warped Reflections. The fight was short, brutal, and utterly one-sided. Merck moved with a speed that belied his gaunt frame, his staff a blur of motion. Kaya swung her ice axe, a clumsy, desperate arc that he parried easily with his own weapon. The sound of wood striking metal rang out in the silent cove. He was not a simple priest. He was a warrior, trained for generations in a unique form of combat. He didn't try to strike her directly. His attacks were aimed at the sand around her feet. Each time the lodestone on his staff struck the beach, the black sand reacted. It leaped up, forming temporary, sharp spikes that tried to trip her, to immobilize her. He was fighting with the island itself as his weapon. Kaya scrambled backward, dodging the erupting sand spikes, her heart pounding. She was outmatched. Her only advantage was her unpredictability, her desperation. While he was focused on the ground, she threw her rock hammer. It was a wild, unaimed shot, but it served its purpose. Merck flinched, batting the hammer away with his staff. In that split second of distraction, Kaya ran. She fled the cove of bones, not back to her cave, but deeper into the island's interior. She could hear Merck behind her, his footsteps steady and relentless, the scrape of his staff on the rocks a constant, menacing rhythm. She was no longer just being tested by the island. She was being hunted by its high priest. The chase led her into a part of the island she had not yet seen, a region of geothermal activity. The ground grew warm under her boots. Vents in the rock hissed, releasing plumes of sulfurous steam that smelled of rotten eggs. The air shimmered with heat. The landscape was a twisted, hellish version of itself, the black rocks stained with vibrant, sickly yellows and oranges from mineral deposits. She ducked behind a large, steaming fumarole, gasping for breath, her lungs burning. The pulse of the island was overpowering here. It was a physical blow, a constant, concussive force against her body. The ground vibrated, and the air hummed with a powerful, dissonant energy. She peered around the rock. Merk was gone. The landscape was empty, save for the hissing steam and warped rocks. A trick. He was flanking her. She pressed herself against the hot rock, trying to control her ragged breathing, straining her ears for any sound of his approach. That's when the hallucinations began. Not the subtle, auditory tricks of before, but full-blown, multi-sensory assaults. The steam was the catalyst. Its heat and chemical composition, combined with the intense magnetic fields, were a potent psychedelic cocktail. The rock she was leaning against softened, its surface becoming pliant and fleshy like skin. It pulsed in time with the island's heartbeat. The ground beneath her feet began to breathe, rising and falling in a slow, rhythmic swell. The island was no longer a metaphor for a living thing. It was literally, viscerally alive. She stumbled away, a cry of revulsion escaping her lips. The world warped around her. The yellow and orange mineral deposits bled across the rocks like fresh paint, forming shifting, geometric patterns, the divine geometry Merk had spoken of. The patterns resolved into eyes. 1,000 yellow eyes opening in the rock, all staring at her, watching, judging. She ran, but the landscape shifted with her. A path would open before her, only to close into a solid wall of rock when she approached. The canyon walls seemed to sweat, a clear, viscous fluid weeping from the stone. This was the island's inner sanctum, its raw, unfiltered consciousness laid bare. She saw Merk, or a reflection of him, standing on a ridge above her. But he was changed. His skin was the color of basalt, cracked and seamed with lines of orange light. His eyes were burning coals. He raised his staff, and a bolt of pure magnetic energy, a visible ripple in the air, shot down and struck the ground at her feet. She scrambled away, her mind struggling to separate reality from illusion. The impact felt real. The ground where it struck was now a circle of fused, glassy rock. The island's thoughts were becoming manifest. Its power was no longer subtle. She found herself in a small, circular basin, a natural amphitheater of warped rock. There was no way out. The walls were too high, too sheer. She was trapped. In the center of the basin stood a figure, not Merk. It was herself. A perfect doppelganger stood 10 feet away, dressed in her own gear, her face a mirror of Kaya's own terror. The reflection copied her every move. When Kaya raised her ice axe, the doppelganger did the same. It was a perfect, horrifying mirror. "Who are you?" Kaya choked out, the words feeling foolish as soon as they left her lips. The doppelganger's expression changed. Its look of terror melted away, replaced by a calm, serene smile, a smile of utter peace. It lowered its ice axe. "I am the one who says yes," the doppelganger said, its voice a perfect replica of Kaya's own. "I am the one who is not afraid. I am the vessel that is pure." The doppelganger took a step forward. "We don't have to fight it, Kaya. We can let go. We can accept the gift. We can be complete." "No," Kaya whispered, backing away. "Why not?" the reflection asked, its voice full of a gentle, seductive reason. "What is so precious about this small, frightened mind of yours? This collection of anxieties and petty regrets? We can be part of something vast, something eternal. We can be a god." The doppelganger held out its hand. "It doesn't have to hurt. All you have to do is say yes. Let go, join me." This was the final test, the most insidious one. The island was not just creating monsters from her fears, it was creating a savior from her desires. The desire for peace, the desire for an end to the struggle. The temptation to simply give in was a physical force, a sweet, warm current pulling her forward. It would be so easy to stop fighting. Kaya looked at the outstretched hand, at her own face smiling back at her. She saw the peace in its eyes, the promise of an end to terror. And she saw the emptiness behind it, the placid gaze of a puppet, the serene smile of a slave. "I am not you," Kaya said, her voice shaking but firm. The doppelganger's smile faltered. "We could be." "My fear is mine," Kaya stated, each word a painful affirmation. "My regret is mine. My pain is mine. I will not give it away. I will not be scoured. I would rather be a broken, frightened human than a perfect, empty god." She raised her ice axe, not to attack the reflection, but to strike her own arm. The sharp pain was a bolt of pure, grounding reality. The doppelganger recoiled, a look of confusion on its face. Pain was an impurity. It could not compute. "I am Kaya Yevinen," she screamed, the sound echoing in the basin. "And I say no." The moment she screamed the word, the illusion shattered. The doppelganger dissolved into a cloud of heat haze. The eyes in the rocks vanished. The fleshy ground became hard, solid stone once more. The hallucination was broken, defeated not by a weapon, but by an act of pure, stubborn, human will. She stood alone in the basin, panting, the cut on her arm a fiery, welcome pain. She had faced her own reflection and chosen herself. A slow, deliberate scraping sound came from the entrance to the basin. Merk Vance stood there, his real, physical self. The look of rage was gone, replaced by something far more disturbing, a look of awe. "Remarkable," he breathed, his voice filled with a reverence she had not heard before. The scriptures never spoke of this. They never spoke of a vessel that could break the scourging, one that could master the fear. He lowered his staff, planting it on the ground. He looked at her not as an impure vessel, but as something new, something unexpected. "Perhaps I was wrong," Merk said, a strange, excited light in his gray eyes. "Perhaps the vessel is not meant to be broken. Perhaps it is meant to be forged." He smiled, a genuine, chilling smile. "The pain, the fear, the defiance, they are not impurities. They are the fire that strengthens the steel. You are not the vessel I was taught to expect, Kaya Yevinen. You are something far, far greater." He took a step forward, his arms open in a gesture of welcome. The communion is tomorrow, and it will be glorious. Chapter 11. The Unwilling Alliance. The awe in Merck's eyes was 1,000 times more terrifying than his rage. His previous antagonism was a comprehensible threat, a man to be fought, a dogma to be opposed. This new, sudden reverence was a cage of a different sort. He no longer saw her as a problem to be solved, but as a prophecy fulfilled in an unexpected and, to him, far more beautiful way. He saw her defiance not as a flaw but as a feature. She had not just survived the trial, she had transcended it. And in doing so, she had become the perfect, undeniable instrument for his God. "You see now," he said, his voice low and electric with excitement. He took another step forward, his hands still open, a gesture of absolute peace that felt like a threat of absolute possession. The old texts were incomplete, parables. They spoke of a vessel, pure and empty, ready to be filled. But the resonator is not a passive God. It does not want a cup. It wants a crucible, a partner strong enough to withstand its embrace. Kaya pushed herself to her feet, the cut on her arm a throbbing, grounding reality against the tide of his zealous insanity. The pain was hers. The blood was hers. She would not let it become a key for him. "I am not your partner. I am your prisoner." "You were a prisoner of your own limited world," Merck countered, his smile unwavering. "A world of small questions and smaller answers. Here, you stand on the precipice of an answer so vast it will unmake every question you have ever had. You have proven yourself worthy. You have wrestled with the God and you have not been broken. You have been sharpened." Her mind raced, desperately seeking a new strategy. Fighting him was futile. He was stronger, and in this place the very ground was his ally. Running was impossible. He knew the island, and she was exhausted, cornered. That left only one path: deception. She had to become the vessel he now saw. She had to play the part of the forged, willing instrument long enough to get to the heart of his religion, to the core of the volcano, and destroy it. She let the ice axe in her hand drop slightly, a subtle gesture of concession. She schooled her features, letting the anger drain away, replaced by a carefully constructed mask of weary, dawning comprehension. You knew this would happen." Merck's smile widened. He saw what he wanted to see. "I hoped. I prayed. The scouring is a test of faith for the keeper as much as the vessel. I confess my own faith faltered. I saw only your resistance, but the resonator saw your strength. It has chosen wisely." He retrieved her rock hammer from where it had fallen and offered it to her, handle first. A peace offering, a coronation gift. Kaya took it, her fingers brushing his. His skin was cool and dry. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice a carefully calibrated mix of awe and trepidation. "Now we prepare you," Merck said, his energy almost manic. "The communion is at dawn. The alignment will be perfect. We must go to the antechamber at the foot of the mountain. It is a place of final meditation before you enter the sacred body of the resonator." He turned and began to lead the way out of the geothermal basin. He did not look back to see if she was following. He had no doubt. In his mind, she had already consented. Kaya took a deep breath, the sulfurous air burning her lungs, and followed him. She was now a spy in her own life, an unwilling pilgrim on a journey to a monstrous god she intended to murder. The trek to the volcano was a journey into the heart of the island's power. As they walked, the landscape grew more extreme, more overtly alive. The constant 50 Hz pulse grew from a subcutaneous vibration into an audible, soul-shaking hum that resonated in her bones, in her teeth. The air was so charged with magnetic energy that small metal objects, the buckles on her pack, the zippers on her jacket, vibrated with their own tiny, high-pitched song. She felt a constant, light pressure against her skin, as if she were walking through a thick, invisible fluid. Merck walked with a serene, confident stride, pointing out features as a proud landowner would show off his estate. "To your left, you see the veins of chorus," he said, indicating a series of deep fissures in the ground from which the low humming was most pronounced. "The resonator sings its oldest songs there, the ones about the cooling of the world." He pointed to a sheer cliff face where the rock was twisted into bizarre, spiraling patterns. "A meditation on gravity. It is quite beautiful, is it not?" Kaya could only nod, her throat tight. She saw not beauty, but the terrifying scrawl of an alien mind, a consciousness that thought in terms of geology and millennia. The scale of it was crushing. To this thing, a human life was less than a single grain of sand on its infinite beaches. They arrived at the base of the volcano as the gray light began to fail. The mountain loomed over them, a black, hulking giant against the darkening sky, its peak wreathed in a steady plume of steam. It seemed to be breathing. Merck led her to a sheer wall of obsidian, so smooth and black it looked like a slab of polished night. There were no visible cracks, no seams, no doorway. "The antechamber," Merck announced with a flourish. "It has not been opened in 3 generations. My grandfather waited his entire life. He died without seeing the vessel arrive." "How do we get in?" Kaya asked, playing her part. Merck turned to her, his eyes gleaming with fanatical light. "The door is a lock. The atramentare blood is the key. It does not respond to me. My bloodline is of the guardians, not the heirs. It will respond only to you. Place your hand upon the stone." This was the first test of her deception. She hesitated, her mind screaming in protest. To willingly interface with this place, even in a small way, felt like a profound betrayal of herself. But she had no choice. Merck was watching, his expression intense. Any refusal now would shatter the illusion. She reached out a trembling hand, the one without the cut, and pressed her palm flat against the cold, smooth obsidian. For a moment, nothing happened. The rock was just rock, cold and inert. A sliver of hope rose in her. Perhaps it was all a lie, a madman's fantasy. Then the stone warmed beneath her touch. A deep, resonant hum vibrated up her arm, a pure, concentrated version of the island's pulse. Faint, blue lines of light appeared in the obsidian, spreading from her fingertips like cracks in ice. They formed a complex geometric pattern, a locking mechanism of light and resonance. With a low grinding sound, a sound of stone shifting on stone for the first time in a century, a section of the wall began to slide inward, revealing a dark, triangular opening. Merck gasped, a sound of pure, ecstatic vindication. "It is as the scriptures foretold. The way is open." He gestured for her to enter. "Go, meditate, prepare yourself, I will keep watch. At dawn we will descend into the heart." Kaya stood at the threshold, staring into the absolute, silent darkness within. The air that flowed out was ancient, dry, and carried the faint, metallic scent of the island's core. She was at the entrance to the temple. Her deception had worked. She had passed the test. But as she took the first step into that suffocating blackness, a new, terrible thought surfaced. To destroy a god, she first had to walk right into its open mouth. The door slid shut behind her with a sound of final, grinding finality, plunging her into a darkness so complete it felt like a solid substance. The alliance was over. The final act had begun. Chapter 12. The Heart Chamber. The darkness inside the antechamber was total. It was a physical presence, a thick, velvety blackness that swallowed the light from her headlamp, its beam terminating a mere foot from the lens as if consumed by the void. The silence was just as profound. The constant, oppressive pulse of the island was gone, completely blocked by the obsidian walls. It was a sensory deprivation chamber designed by a god. Kaya stood frozen just inside the entrance, her breath catching in her throat. This was a place designed to unmoor the mind, to strip away the senses and leave one alone with their thoughts. A place of meditation, as Merck had called it, a place of psychological dismantling. She refused to let it work. She anchored herself to the physical, the solid weight of the ice axe in her hand, the rough texture of the stone floor beneath her boots, the rhythmic pattern of her own breathing. She forced herself to move, shuffling forward into the darkness, one hand outstretched. Her fingers brushed against a wall. It was not rough, natural rock, but smooth and cool like the door. The chamber was not a cave, it was constructed. She followed the wall, her boots echoing softly in the immense, silent space. The chamber was circular, and in the center her foot bumped against something, a low stone dais. She knelt, her hands exploring its surface. It was a pedestal, and on it sat a single object, a sphere perfectly round and smooth, about the size of a human head. It was made of the same obsidian as the walls. As her fingers traced its surface, the sphere warmed, and a faint blue light emanated from within, illuminating the chamber. The walls were not bare. They were covered from floor to ceiling with carved inscriptions. Not the runic script from the keeper's journal, but something else entirely. They were star charts, but of a sky that did not belong to Earth. Alien constellations, spiraling galaxies, and the pathways of comets and celestial bodies that followed impossible, non-Euclidean trajectories. And woven through it all was the signature logarithmic spiral, the fingerprint of the resonator. This was its history, its origin story, written in the language of cosmic cartography. It was not from this world. A wave of vertigo washed over her. The scope of it, the sheer age and alien nature of the entity she was confronting, was beyond human comprehension. Her plan to kill it suddenly seemed like a bacterium plotting the assassination of a mountain range. She spent the night in a state of high-strung, sleepless alertness, refusing to succumb to the chamber's disorienting purpose. When a faint grinding sound signaled the opening of the door, she was on her feet, her face a mask of calm resolve. Merck stood at the entrance, the pale light of dawn silhouetting his gaunt frame. "The alignment has begun," he said, his voice hushed with reverence. "It is time." He led her from the antechamber into a new tunnel. This was not a constructed space, but a natural lava tube, its sides ribbed and glassy. It spiraled downward deep into the earth. The pulse of the island returned, stronger than ever, a deafening, rhythmic roar that she felt in the fillings of her teeth. The air grew hot, thick with the smell of sulfur and superheated metal. Veins of a phosphorescent, blue-glowing ore ran along the tunnel walls, casting a ghostly light and illuminating their descent. "You are walking through the body of the god," Merrick whispered, his eyes wide with ecstasy. "Its arteries, its nervous system. Soon you will reach its heart." The tunnel opened into a cavern of impossible scale. They stood on a wide obsidian ledge overlooking a scene of terrifying, sublime grandeur. The cavern was a vast, spherical dome, miles across. Below them was a lake of magma, a roiling, incandescent sea of liquid rock that cast a fiery, orange glow on the cavern ceiling. Rivers of magma flowed down the walls in fiery waterfalls. The heat was a physical blow, a searing wall of energy that stole the breath from her lungs. In the very center of the cavern, suspended over the magma lake by what looked like colossal, shimmering strands of solidified magnetic force, was a platform of pure black obsidian. And on that platform, at its absolute center, was the lodestone heart. It was immense, a perfect ovoid monolith of black stone, at least 30 feet high, humming with an unimaginable power. It seemed to absorb the fiery light of the magma, making the space around it appear darker, colder. The air near it warped and shimmered, reality itself bending around its immense gravitational and magnetic pull. It did not look like a part of the world. It looked like a hole in the world, a patch of alien physics stitched into the fabric of the earth. "Glorious," Merrick breathed, tears streaming down his face. "The heart of the resonator." A narrow, natural bridge of obsidian, no more than 3 feet wide, snaked from their ledge out to the central platform. There were no handrails. A single misstep would mean a fall into the magma below. "The final path," Merrick said, gesturing to the bridge. "The vessel must walk it alone. Go, Kaya Yevinen. Go and meet your God. Place your hand upon the heart and become eternal." He stood back, his face alight with the bliss of a man witnessing the culmination of his entire existence. He would not interfere. This was her moment. Kaya looked from his ecstatic face to the humming, reality-warping monolith. This was it, the final act. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic human rhythm against the slow, titanic pulse of the heart. She took her first step onto the bridge. The heat from below was intense, the air thick with shimmering waves. She kept her eyes fixed on the monolith, her grip tight on the ice axe she carried at her side. She walked the bridge, each step a victory of will over terror. The humming grew, pressing in on her, a sound so deep it was no longer a sound but a state of being. The heart loomed larger and larger, its surface a perfect, light-devouring black. It was beautiful. It was horrifying. It was the enemy. She reached the platform. The black obsidian was cool under her boots, despite the lake of fire below. She stood before the lodestone heart, a tiny, human figure in the face of a cosmic absolute. The air around it was thick with power, making her teeth ache and her vision swim. She could feel Merrick's expectant gaze on her back. She could feel the heart's immense, ancient, sleeping consciousness. She raised her hand, as if to place it on the stone in submission. She held the pose for a heartbeat, a final act of deception for her audience of one. Then, with a scream born of rage and terror and a desperate, stubborn love for her own fragile human self, she swung the ice axe. She put every ounce of her strength, every fiber of her being into the blow. It was not a gesture of communion. It was an act of war. The sharp, steel pick of the axe flew in a silver arc, aimed directly at the center of the lodestone heart. Chapter 13. The Resonance of Silence. The impact was not the sharp, shattering crack of steel on stone Kaya expected. There was no sound at all. The moment the ice axe's pick touched the surface of the monolith, a wave of absolute silence radiated outwards, swallowing the roar of the magma, the hum of the heart, even the frantic beat of her own pulse. The lodestone heart did not break. It yielded. The surface became pliant like thick tar, and the ice axe sank into it, not with force but with an irresistible magnetic pull. It drew the axe in, and with it, Kaya's hand. Her glove dissolved into nothingness, and her bare palm slapped against the monolith's impossible surface. The circuit was complete. The world dissolved into a cataclysm of pure information. She was not in the cavern anymore. She was everywhere. She was nowhere. Her consciousness, her sense of self, was ripped from its physical moorings and dragged into the infinite, cold expanse of the resonator's mind. It was not a mind of thoughts and emotions, but of pure data, of mathematics, of geological time. She experienced the formation of the planet from a cloud of dust, the slow, grinding ballet of tectonic plates, the rise and fall of mountains over millions of years. She felt the crushing loneliness of a consciousness that had slept in stone for eons, its only sensation the slow turning of the galaxy. It was a mind of perfect, cold, unassailable logic, and her sudden presence within it was a paradox, a ghost of heat and emotion in a universe of absolute zero. The resonator focused on her. Its thoughts were like glaciers, vast and slow. It sifted through her being, her memories, her emotions, not with malice, but with a profound, detached curiosity. It analyzed her love for her mother, her passion for science, her fear of death, her stubborn, illogical defiance. These concepts were alien to it. It had no frame of reference for grief or joy or rage. To the resonator, they were errors in the data, noise in the perfect, silent signal. Impurity, the consciousness stated, a thought that was not a word but a feeling of fundamental wrongness. It began the process of deletion, of scouring her mind, of reducing her to a clean, simple variable it could understand. But Kaya, forged and sharpened by the island's trials, fought back. She did not have the power to destroy the entity, but she had a weapon it could not comprehend, her humanity. She didn't resist the scouring. She embraced it. She weaponized her pain. She focused all her will on a single memory, her mother's hand growing cold in hers in the sterile hospital room. She pushed the raw, undiluted grief, the love, the anger, the feeling of absolute loss into the resonator's consciousness. She gave it the gift of mortality. The effect was catastrophic. The vast, cold mind reeled. The concept of an ending, of a permanent loss, was a logical impossibility to a being that measured its existence in geologic epochs. It was like dividing by zero. The perfect crystalline structure of its consciousness fractured. For the first time in its billion-year existence, the resonator felt something. It felt the echo of pain, and it panicked. In the cavern, Merk watched in horror. The lodestone heart, once a perfect, silent black, was now convulsing with light. Veins of chaotic blue and red energy spiderwebbed across its surface. The monolith shuddered, and a high-pitched, discordant shriek echoed through the chamber, the sound of a god in agony. This was not the glorious communion he had envisioned. This was a violation, an infection. The resonator, in its panic, tried to eject the source of the pain, the foreign variable corrupting its perfect system. It pushed Kaya out of its mind with the force of a supernova. She was slammed back into her own body. She collapsed onto the obsidian platform, gasping, the connection severed. The shriek from the monolith intensified, and a massive crack, glowing with white-hot energy, appeared on its surface. The resonator had broken its own heart to save itself. The pulse of the island stuttered, faltered, and died. The cavern groaned. The shimmering magnetic strands holding the central platform aloft flickered and snapped. The heart chamber, its power source shattered, began to tear itself apart. The volcano, its consciousness lobotomized and reeling in agony, began to erupt. Not the gentle plume of steam from before, but a true, violent, cataclysmic eruption. Merk stood on the far ledge, his face a mask of utter devastation. His god was dying. His life's work, his entire faith, was being consumed in fire and chaos. He watched the lodestone heart, now webbed with 1,000 cracks, tilt on its failing platform. It slid from its perch and plunged into the magma below with a concussive hiss that sent a wave of molten rock splashing upwards. Merk did not move. He simply watched, a silent, broken figure, as a section of the cavern roof detached and fell, consuming him in a silent avalanche of stone. Survival instinct, pure and primal, took over Kaya. She scrambled back across the now tilting bridge, dodging falling rocks, the heat scorching her clothes. She fled up the lava tube, the entire mountain shaking itself to pieces around her. The blue ore in the walls flickered and died, plunging her into darkness, but she ran on, guided by the memory of the path, fueled by a ferocious, desperate will to live. She burst out of the entrance at the base of the volcano into a world of chaos. The sky was black with ash. Rocks of molten lava rained down. The ground shook so violently she was thrown from her feet. The island was destroying itself. She ran for the coast, for the relative safety of the water. She reached her cave just as a fissure tore it from the cliff face, sending it tumbling into the churning sea. The southern shore was gone, swallowed by the waves. The black sand beaches were being consumed by tsunamis born of the eruption, the malevolent sand scoured away by the indifferent ocean. The island was being wiped clean. She stood on a remaining cliff edge, watching the apocalypse when she saw it. A light on the water, a boat. It was the St. Yrnusker. Berkir, seeing the cataclysmic eruption from afar, had returned, drawn by either a flicker of conscience or the morbid curiosity of a salvager. Kaya stumbled down to the water's edge, waving her arms, screaming until her throat was raw. The Zodiac, manned by the terrified, pale face of Gudmund, plowed through the ash-choked waves to reach her. Hours later, she sat on the deck of the St. Yrnusker, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, watching the island die. It was a pillar of fire and smoke on the horizon, a furious, final testament to the God she had broken. She was safe. She was alive. She lifted a hand to her ear. The hum was gone. The silence was absolute. It was a true, clean, and perfect silence, stripped of all resonance, all memory, all pain. She had won. She had faced a God and had deafened it. But as she stared into the profound, empty quiet, she knew that the memory of its vast, lonely song and the terrible, human noise she had replaced it with would be a ghost that haunted her own silence for the rest of her days. The end.